Hey everyone, it's Marvin. As you may know, the Books and Boba podcast is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts. And this year for Heritage Month, we wanted to share what some of our other fellow Potluck pods are doing. So this is a special drop from our sister podcast, Asian Americana, hosted by Quincy Surasmith, which is a podcast where Quincy, who is an experienced radio journalist, explores the slices of distinctly Asian American culture and history. The episode we're featuring today is an exploration of the connections between country music and Lao American culture. As always, if you like what you hear, you can learn more about Asian Americana and our other Potluck pods by going to the website podcastpotluck.com. And now, please enjoy Asian Americana.
You're listening to Potluck.
It's been a long time in pandemic. As of this recording, we're approaching 2 years. A little less, if you go by when the restrictions and quarantines across the world started. During that time, I moved into my own place. And especially in the pre-vaccine period, I tried to be really good about not being near other people. I'd only go out to get groceries about every 2 or 3 weeks, and only saw people in person maybe once every couple months, and at a distance. Before the pandemic, my calendar would always be filled up with plans to hang out with friends or attend community events. Now, I didn't even have roommates around. Left to my own devices and stuck at home, I had to find ways to occupy myself. I started cooking way more. I bought an expensive weight set so I could exercise without going to the gym. I added a new guitar to my collection, which reinvigorated my love of playing music as I began to learn to play new songs. But most of the time, I reverted to the coping mechanisms of my teenage years. That is, I'd loiter on the internet and talk with whichever friends were available on chat, messaging apps, DMs, Zoom. If APAHM was good enough for me at 14, then all these other tools were going to carry through my need to connect socially in my adulthood. But not everyone saw being isolated as an unwanted restriction.
So during the pandemic, we were all encouraged to go out and be by ourselves, go out into less populated areas. And I think for a lot of people, like having to do solo activities or more quiet activities has been kind of a punishment. And in country music, there's a lot of themes about like being by yourself, on going out on your own. When you put this soundtrack that kind of praises, quiet activities, that praises, less populated areas, I think it puts a more fun spin on it.
That's Timothy Singratsomboune.
Yeah, I'm Timothy Singratsomboune. I'm a Lao American artist, storyteller from Central Ohio, right in Columbus, Ohio, and I use he, him pronouns. And so for me, country music has been a nice decoration to activities I would do out in rural spaces or more like natural spaces. And so I was doing a lot of that. Spending a lot of time on farms or out in nature, away from people.
One stayed on the setting sun behind me. If I had the eyes to see.
As I was growing up, I didn't have the highest esteem for U.S. country music. But just to have some fun and add some decoration to my time in rural America, I would just listen to some of the country music I grew up with. And so it's been really prominent in my mind lately.
Give me grace to fill the empty space, singing
Today, we explore Tim's relationship with country music. What was the relevance of this music to his family? How did his own cultural tastes bring him away from and eventually back to the genre? And how does country music connect Tim to both Lao culture and the Lao communities he grew up around? I'm Quincy Surasmith, and this is Asian Americana.
We're still here, going strong. We're getting tired of proving we belong. We're still here, going strong. We're getting tired of proving we belong.
I did not listen to country music growing up. Actually, I didn't actively listen to music at all until I was a teenager. Even in high school, I was more drawn to new wave, early punk rock, and alternative bands like They Might Be Giants. It wasn't until college that I started to really give country music a shot. My boss at my work-study job had a lot of American roots music on our computer, which led me on a path to classic country. A longtime crush of mine bought me a Johnny Cash CD box set, which I cherished. I even learned how to play some basic country lead guitar and sing Carter family harmonies. While I was still far from a big country fan, I really grew to appreciate it. Unlike me, Tim grew up with a lot of exposure to country music.
So my mother, who is white Appalachian, she is a diehard Dwight Yoakam fan. And like Dwight Yoakam, her family lineage is rooted in eastern Kentucky in those Appalachian Mountains. And then so many of them moved to Columbus, Ohio because of economic opportunity. And so that's Dwight Yoakam's story. And so she's a diehard fan, but also artists like Shania Twain, Martina McBride, Garth Brooks. So I remember hearing lots of this music growing up. There's definitely like home videos of me as a kid singing like Martina McBride and Dwight Yoakam songs because my mom would play them. So I definitely knew them.
Despite the existence of those videos, which I have unsuccessfully begged Tim to share with me, it didn't mean he particularly loved this music growing up.
I just didn't think it was for me. I didn't think that it spoke to me, and I found it to be archaic and just like a caricature of like people.
He had reservations about the sound.
Even just, really basic things like not wanting to really be associated with that accent, right? Which a lot of people in my family don't have like a very like Southern or Appalachian accent just because they've been in Ohio for so long.
And the lyrics.
A lot of the country music, a lot of it is essentially pop themes, like Achy Breaky Heart. Like I appreciate Shania Twain's music, but her lyrics are not fantastic.
So he ended up leaning away from the genre.
I didn't have a huge appreciation for country music when I was a kid who was making my own musical choices, through high school. I really didn't even associate with it. It wasn't my type of thing.
For Tim, his wary relationship to country music was also connected to his relationship with his family, both of which were complicated and tied to his ethnic background.
For me, growing up, especially being mixed race, half white, half Lao, like even with family, there's certain family that I know that I'm not going to be safe around or welcome around. And I just know that that's the same with country music. I know that there's been a real big push lately to kind of rebrand country music as more open and more accepting. In a lot of ways, I'm sure it is. People like to reference Dolly Parton, who is very accepting and very inclusive. And I know that that does exist, but people forget that there also is like these darker dynamics. And so I still approach it with a lot of caution and a healthy amount of distance. And that's kind of how I grew up looking at it.
But as time went on, Tim started giving country music a second thought.
And it was only as I got older with access to the internet where I could really hone in on country music that I felt spoke to me and said things to me that I appreciated and had music and melodies that I liked.
And finding the country music that did speak to him got him rethinking his ideas of what this music was about.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I just didn't vibe with country music was probably like the very surface level things that we judge art on.
There was a hole in the back of the canyon, but I didn't want to tell you till I had to.
But like a lot of it does touch on like working class struggles. A lot of it does touch on, appreciating the great outdoors, the mountains, the deserts, driving down Route 66. I would hear a mix of different songs and different themes. So I have a very complex view of it. I can appreciate it for what it is.
Save my life from the lead of the enemy's fire, and your wounds would have bled until you died. And I might make a piss poor mother and wife, but I know the need of a frontier life. I can settle for yours if you will settle for mine. I'm on your side.
Like we shared earlier, this music helped Tim process being by himself during parts of this pandemic.
I feel like country music is one of the few genres where like solace and solitude is one of the themes. It just gave me a new appreciation for it. And like I said, a lot of it really praises like being by yourself and being alone. Whereas I feel like pop music is always about hanging out, having fun, going out, getting a date, or when you are alone, it's a sad song, it's a sad pop song.
Cavern I've been hiding there so long, I told you it would be okay.
I asked Tim which country artists he likes now.
So some of my personal favorites, I really like the Chicks, formerly the Dixie Chicks. I feel like they have a lot of feminist lyrics, and I like their themes. They talk about going out into the open, going out into the landscape, which is something I really appreciate more and more. They put a really positive spin on being by yourself, being out in nature, being out in the wilderness. I really appreciate a lot of Martina McBride's songs. I do appreciate a lot of Dolly Parton's music. Dwight Yoakam, definitely I feel like his music is very, as corny as it sounds, like music of the people. Like it definitely doesn't sound very produced. I also really appreciate Bobby Gentry, who's like really old school, very soul influence, very black urban music influence from like the 60s and 70s. Because she's a big storyteller, and that's something I definitely appreciate in any music that I listen to, is like painting a picture, telling a story.
But there was another aspect of himself Tim thought about while exploring country music and its spirit.
You asked me a little bit about like what made me like appreciate country music more now. And I think very strangely, queerness plays into that. So I've been able to reapproach country music by leaning into my own queer identity. And I think that's helped me look at this music in a different type of way. I think for a lot of LGBTQ youth, especially like younger gay men, like the perception is that you want to live in the city, you want to live in the biggest city, you have to live in LA or New York or Miami, and you have to listen to a certain type of music. And then I think queerness, and that it challenges even like the normal behaviors in non-heterosexual communities, right? Lets you break out of that. And so for me, even though I always felt pressure to like want to live in New York and want to live in Los Angeles, using queerness as like a rubric to like kind of define myself, I've realized that I actually do kind of enjoy like small towns, like more natural settings, more rural settings, like a quieter pace of life, that lazy, loud nap for 3 hours in the middle of the day type of life. And so I think that's helped me re-engage with country music, because I feel like it doesn't actually have to be counter to my identity.
This is a gay Asian country love song. Oh, Rascal Flatts, Britney Spears, radio on. Make my booty clap like an Asian gong.
Make this booty clap.
This is a gay Asian country love song. I'll be your monster truck rally ride all night long. We're living gay and Asian like we're gonna die young.
It wasn't just American country music that connected Tim to this rural lifestyle. There's this Lao musical genre, their own style of what could also be considered country music, Mo Lam.
My dad was always playing it in the car. It was Mo Lam or John Cougar Mellencamp. Like those were the only two musics he ever played in the car. So I was always around it. I always really, really loved Mo Lam, but I think as a kid in America, and I think for a lot of Lao Americans, you ask your parents, oh, what is this? Or who is this singer? And they're just like, oh, just a singer from Laos, just a singer from Thailand. So they don't really give you a lot of details, but I always loved listening to it.
I also love this kind of music. I didn't get into it until I was grown up, but the rhythms and themes of Mo Lam from Laos and Thailand's northeast Isan region, as well as Luk Thung music, meaning child of the fields, from the central Thai countryside became favorites of mine too. Tim shared with me one of his favorite artists.
But with Mo Lam music, I love Thai or Thai. My dad always played her music, always, always. It was that one song, it's Bun Ti Bo Mi Ai, like A Day Without My Man.
ฟ้าเอ๋ยมีไว้เฮ็ดหยังถ้าอ้ายบ่นั่งเบิ่งดาวนำกันบ่มีก็ได้ปากซอยตรงนั้นหากอ้ายลืมวันเคยเที่ยวร่วมทาง
I think on the surface it's like a love song, but when you watch the music video, it's her like against like the backdrop of these big city buildings, obviously meant to be Bangkok, and there's just like winds blowing in like a breeze from the country, and it's like definitely speaking to Isan people who had to leave their home in the countryside and come work in the big city. So even though it's a love song, for me, I'm feeling like it's also a metaphor. Like, it's not just that your lover has left or that you're separated from your lover, it's that you're separated from your loved ones and your hometown. And you can hear it because it's so sad, but it's so good.
Tim explained more about the themes of rural life and humility that he enjoys in this kind of Southeast Asian country music.
Lao music, Isan music, countryside music from Southeast Asia can be very self-deprecating in a funny way. And I feel like Lao culture and a lot of Lao art forms aren't scared to make fun of Lao people. Lao people are always like joking with each other, calling each other like Baan, which like means like bumpkin. And it's very self-deprecating. There's a lot of humor in it. And I feel like that even like in the Lao pop music that's starting to like really blossom right now is still very self-deprecating in a really funny way. And so for a lot of Lao people, there's a lot of like almost pride and definitely joy when it comes to talking about being from a small town, sitting on, a mat by the river and drinking a beer all day and taking a nap while you go fishing and things like that. There's just like a lot of joy and still a lot of connection to that. So I feel like U.S. country music, and I'm sure any music of people in rural areas, is very similar, like kind of making fun of yourself as a way to also make fun of city people in a more implicit way. So I really appreciate that. And they never take themselves too seriously unless it's a super sad song, which they also love.
This music also deals with the hardship that comes with the joys and slow pace of countryside life.
Another big connection is just like, like the connection to poverty, which I feel like goes hand in hand with being, a bumpkin. A connection to being displaced. Again, like country music has a lot of songs that like value being alone and striking out on your own. There's also a lot of songs about kind of like being forced out of your home for whatever reason. Infidelity, violence, poverty, better opportunity. And that's Mawlam music to a T.
That reminded me of a song I first heard in my early 20s, Taidam Lampan. It's a song from the early 1970s about how the Taidam peoples in Southeast Asia were displaced during war and for decades are forced to keep walking and moving on, far from their homes. I asked him if he ever thought about the same song.
Yeah, definitely. Like that sadness, right? Because it even translates right to like the Taidam lament, right? That sadness is a big part.
Tim also explores these musical themes of living away from urban centers as it relates to the Lao American community in the piece he wrote for our Asian Americana zine. Here's an excerpt.
These songs and stories make me reflect on the uniqueness of the Lao community in the U.S. Despite the perception that all Asian Americans live in coastal metropolises, the truth is different for our refugee communities. In the 70s and 80s, Lao refugees were escaping decades of civil war exacerbated by U.S. imperialism. They had little money or education to bring with them, so they were resettled to whatever locations had cheap housing and blue-collar jobs. This means that many Lao people were settled into the flyover states, where country music is prominent.
Everyone's packing up their cars and headed down the highway. 95 miles never took so long. Didn't have much time, pick the two favorite things you could carry. Pray you don't run out of gas before the wind gets strong. Who knows? There will be a place to come home to, and who knows if the nails and plywood will hold.
I asked him more about those Lao American communities.
So one of my big passions and one of my big projects in life is just to like really explore like just the ways that Lao Americans are unique, even though there's like a lot of overlap, of course, with other Asian American groups. But for Lao people, there's a long history, even before colonization, of, just being out in these rural, mountainous landscapes without, big port cities like our Asian neighbors. So for Lao culture, like the rural life is very ancient. But in the American context, a lot of current dynamics were really reinforced by the wars of the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s that really devastated Southeast Asia. And so, like I mentioned, a lot of Lao people came to the United States as refugees, and refugees just got settled to wherever they could fit in. And a lot of times that would be based around the work that they would do. And so because of the war and because a lot of refugees, didn't have education, they didn't have a lot of skills that would maybe work in a larger urban coastal economy, a lot of farming communities received Southeast Asian refugees, especially a lot of Lao refugees. And my dad actually, when he first came to the United States, he lived on a cabbage farm just outside of Rochester, New York. So New York is a coastal state, but upstate New York, pretty like bumpkiny. And because they were just being resettled to whatever community would take them, a lot of did end up in places like Arkansas, across Texas, Oklahoma.
Communities like this were far from the kind of centers and resources available in bigger cities along the east and west coasts.
I don't think I've ever really seen that acknowledged in media or even in community advocacy. I don't know a lot of Asian American groups that go into rural areas. And then in the media, I think it's become slightly more prominent now. We have, films like Minari, right, which takes place, I think, in Arkansas, actually. And there's so many Lao people and Southeast Asians, in the South. I think people are a little bit more familiar with Vietnamese around the Gulf Coast, around New Orleans and Houston's and things. But Lao people, there's huge communities in Louisiana, but not even in New Orleans in the urban center. It's out west on the Cajun prairies where you found Lao people in Louisiana. And I just think there's a story to tell, whether we want to tell that to, the wider world, to wider Asian America, or just to acknowledge within ourselves, right? Because we can also just share art within our own community as well. I even want to push other Lao Americans to go and look for Lao Americans in these areas where we're told that there aren't Asian people, where there is no Asian American culture. Because in New Iberia, Louisiana, and in Fort Smith, Arkansas, if I were to name these places, you would probably say, it's probably not worth your time to, go looking for Asian people. But there's actually huge Lao American communities there. And so I think in sharing, this part of our history, it helps ensure that nobody gets left out.
I asked Tim to read one more passage from his piece in our Asian Americana zine.
This makes me think back to my own father. I remember riding in a pickup truck with him in Champasak province when he told me the story of his short life with my mother's paternal family and the rural haulers of eastern Kentucky. In the early 80s, my parents left Ohio to look for a better opportunity in Rhode Island, living in a 2-bedroom Providence apartment with 2 other Lao refugee families. That didn't work out, so they hopped on a Greyhound bus headed for Ashland, Kentucky. My maternal grandfather got my dad a job driving massive coal trucks up the near vertical sides of mountains, but my dad wouldn't live this Kentucky life for more than a few weeks. My parents knew that reading and writing wasn't going to help them in Martin County, Kentucky, so they hit Route 23 back to Columbus. Now that's a country song, if there ever was one.
She was leaving Iowa. Her daddy said she was wasting her time, chasing rainbows and dreams she was never gonna find. He had his own plans for her life, said this road won't take you far and don't bother coming back when they don't make you a star. That Tennessee River echoes the endless blue sky, and those dogwoods in spring make you ready to leave everything behind. But that music highway that leads you to the center of the state, if it could speak, it'd tell you how many hearts it's seen break
Sometimes you hear your stories in these songs, whether or not they were originally written for you. Sometimes you have to write your own songs and tell your own stories, hoping that they reach whoever needs to hear them. Either way, let's keep writing, let's keep listening, and let's keep sharing. Thank you to Tim for talking with me in this episode. You can learn more about his work at singhasone.com. That's SINGHASONH.com. Or on Patreon, Twitter, and Instagram at Singhasone. Thanks also to Tim for writing for the Asian Americana zine. You'll have to join our Patreon if you want to read Tim's whole piece as well as the rest of the zine. Asian Americana is hosted and produced by me, Quincy Surasmith. Our opening song is We Belong by Magnetic North and Tayo Na, featuring Chris Ijima. The song you're hearing with these credits is We Are the Children by Chris Ijima, Nobuko Miyamoto, and Charlie Chin. The music you heard during this episode included The Road by The Idle Hours featuring BJ Cole, I'm On Your Side by Good Luck Ola, that's Good Luck OLA, Gay Asian Country Love Song by Nathan Ramos Park, Wan Ti Bo Mi Ai by Thai Orathai, Thai Dam Lam Pan by Gaw Viset, Who Knows, and Next Big Thing by Betty Soo. That's Betty S-O-O. You can find links to all these artists on our website. You can visit our site at asianamericana.com, find us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at Asian_Americana. If you like the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. If you really like the show, you can donate by becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon. There you can get our 5th anniversary zine, t-shirts, and stickers. Just click the support button on our website. Asian Americana is a proud founding member of Potluck, a collective of podcasts featuring voices and stories from the Asian American community. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more stories of Asian Americana.